insurrection. In 2530, the Federation set out to undermine imperial control of Alioth by exploiting local resentment of the governor. They covertly supported acts of protest and petty vandalism. Then, when the inevitable imperial crackdown followed, stoked the fires of social unrest. A terrorist movement called the Quakers emerged, and the atrocities escalated. The years that followed saw a protracted and degrading series of proxy wars and cynical propaganda campaigns as the federal, imperial, and corporate powers all contended for Alioth. The system made an abortive attempt to establish its independence in 2617, resulting in a short-lived cooperation between the Empire and the Federation, neither of which were willing to allow this. The Revolution. In the early 4th millennium, both the Federation and the Empire had a presence in the Alioth system. Fruitcake, now known as Gordonworld, was a federal protectorate, while the Empire had earlier conducted terraforming experiments on the world of New California and also held gas mining platforms in the system. The federal corporations supplying New California had raised the prices of their goods several times in the previous years, and when they imposed yet another price hike, the planet's inhabitants revolted. In the insurrection that followed, rebels commandeered any available ships and headed out to the gas mining platforms, where they attacked the outpost's corporate employees. Alarmed, the Empire and the Federation dispatched ships to put down the rebellion, but were beaten back by a hastily assembled force made up of fighters from Alioth and, crucially, volunteers from nearby independent systems. Neither the Empire nor the Federation were able to gain a foothold, and eventually both forces had to withdraw. The Empire faced too many logistical problems fighting so far from home, while the Federation's efforts were undermined by public sympathy for the rebels. An alliance was brokered. The victory in Alioth had proven that independent systems working together could hold their own against the superpowers. It fell to pilot Mick Turner and scientist Meredith Argent to ride the wave of public spirit and propose a permanent alliance, under whose aegis independent systems could enjoy freedom from imperial and federal interference. The alliance was founded in 3230, and in the next 2 decades, it expanded its membership to more than 20 systems, some defecting from the Federation and the Empire, others pledging as independents. The Alliance. Society. Many worlds, few rules, no overlords. The Alliance's Articles of Membership are designed to unite the member systems with strong, straightforward bonds that allow as much self-determination as possible. Membership guarantees mutual prosperity through free trade and security through the Alliance Defense Force, while leaving much of the business of government.
Lakon, Whiskey Alpha Bravo. Thank you for choosing our station, Commander. We hope you find everything to your liking.
To the individual.
Access authorized. Clear command to Delta Bay 02.
The Alliance Assembly acts as a central arbitration committee, helping to settle disputes between member systems. It also oversees formal arrangements between members, such as treaties, research goals, and mutually agreed policies. As no one system can be allowed to carry more weight than another, the Assembly frequently finds itself bombed.
Speed restrictions are in effect at this facility. Please comply.
In endless back and forth negotiations. Getting them to agree on anything is a task often compared to herding Linglangs, notoriously ill-tempered carnivores from the Achenar system. A body of civil servants who remain uninvolved in politics handle most of the day-to-day
Heavy traffic ahead, Commander. Fly safely.
administrative work that enables the Alliance to function. Conditional autonomy for member systems. Alliance members are required to subscribe to and uphold a code of human rights, and to have a democratically elected government. Citizens of any member state have a right of freedom of movement, and residents within any other member state. Furthermore, all member systems are obliged to give immediate military assistance to any fellow member when necessary. The Alliance. Military.
Docking successful. Ground crew dispatched. You are most welcome, Commander.
Alliance Defense Force. While each Alliance member system maintains its own navy, all members are required to commit ships and crew to the Alliance Defense Force. This rapid response group usually remains within Alliance space, and its tasks vary from providing a beleaguered system with military assistance to evacuating settlements hit by natural disaster. A 6-member Council of Admirals oversees the Alliance Defense Force. It is accountable to the Assembly, but does not require its approval before taking action. This freedom of decision-making prevents urgent military action being delayed by tedious debate. The Alliance. Culture and values. Cooperation.
Ship uncoupled. Exit station quickly and safely.
Mutual aid, tolerance, and respect. The values that bind the Alliance systems also hold true on an interpersonal level. Just as the different worlds of the Alliance formally recognize one another's legitimacy and value, individuals are generally reluctant to show prejudice against others.
Pay attention, Commander. Ship-to-ship collisions will not be tolerated.
Band together to help those in genuine need. Diversity is strength. Members of the Alliance are not obliged to conform to what they consider the corporate subject.
This is a no-entry zone. Clear the area immediately.
Or the status obsessed posturing of the Imperials. Individual systems are encouraged to preserve and celebrate their own cultural identities. This approach results in a rich variety of artistic, literary, and dramatic output. Free to speak, free to protest. One curious cultural constant across the Alliance member systems is the way the citizens indulge their freedom to complain. They can criticize their governments without fear of repression, and they frequently do so. Previous experience of exploitation has left many citizens cynical, who possessed of a certain modern humor and a willingness to life as it comes. The Alliance. Diplomatic relations. The Federation. Alliance attitudes to the Federation vary sharply, depending on whether one is asking about the Federation's government or its citizenry. The government is seen as a hidebound relic, unable to arrest its slow decline into decadence. But the general populace are much more compassionately viewed. An Alliance citizen, proud of his or her own emancipation, is likely to have a rather condescending view of a federal citizen. They are characterized as ignorant dupes, kept satiated by mass-market entertainment and branded consumer goods. This is not seen as their fault, however. On the contrary, it is widely held that the Federation and the corporate barons deliberately keep the people in this servile state. The Alliance is more interested in enticing federal systems to join its union, thereby winning the moral war, than in exacting vengeance for the wrongs of the past. There has been too much violence already. The Empire. To the Alliance, the Empire is anathema. With its monolithic culture, veneration of opulence, disdain for human rights and tolerance of slavery, it could not be further from the Alliance's values of mutual respect and freedom from exploitation. Yet, for all this, many Alliance members would rather deal with the Empire than the Federation. The common belief is that the Federation will always pretend to be something it is not. At least with the Empire, you know you're dealing. Most Alliance citizens view the emergence of a progressive movement within the Empire.
Lakon, Whiskey Alpha Bravo. The Federation welcomes you, Commander. We'll be happy to serve you in this port.
Cynicism. Everyone knows that the Empire is incapable of changing its ways. The whole Imperial social model is an imitation of the past.
Okay, Commander. Make your way to landing pad number 09er.
But some in the Alliance Alliance nevertheless welcome the ascension of the first female emperor. The edifice may not be about to crumble, but such a profound change cannot be ignored. The Alliance. Introduction. Rise, like lions after slumber, in unvanquishable
Steady
number.
traffic in this area.
Shake your chains to earth, like dew.
Landing operation complete. Dispatching ground. Welcome to the station, Commander.
Individuals. Aiden Tanner.
Our species has been banding together to fight the outsider since we lived in caves. We stand against the odds.
Detach confirmed. You are go for departure.
The invaders and the monsters. And we're proud. But you have to remember one thing. Nobody in the history of conflict ever solves
Attention. Please observe safe clearance distances.
Everyone believes they're the hero of their own story. If you can't understand that, if you can't stand in the enemy's shoes, even for a second, and ask yourself why he thinks he needs to kill you, then you don't know what it means to be a soldier.
Aiden Tanner, addressed to Federal Cadets, 3298. Admiral... Aiden Tanner is a senior officer in the Federal Navy. He has served for more than 4 decades, and in 3303 was given significant responsibility in the struggle against the Thargoids, first being appointed Chief of Federal Security, and later to Chief Military Liaison to the Cross Superpower Initiative, Aegis. He is widely respected, even outside of federal space, for his conscientious and level-headed approach to conflict. Born in 3254, Tanner was expected to follow in the footsteps of his authoritarian father by becoming a doctor, but instead enlisted in the Federal Navy, along with a group of friends, in what he would later describe as a rash act of adolescent rebellion that I have not once regretted. Tanner's father died in 3277. The two never resolved their estrangement. Tanner's early naval career was anything but distinguished. Known to his comrades in arms as Spoonie for his habit of eating directly from food packets instead of using plates, he was distinguished more by his irreverent sense of humor than his competence. 6 months in, Tanner was found to be responsible for a scurrilous newsletter that satirized several senior officers, including Sergeant Burke Hazel, who was offended and deeply hurt. Hazel had taken a personal interest in Tanner and had encouraged him to persist when the cadet had struggled with basic training. Tanner's defense that he had been trying to improve morale was rejected, and although he was allowed to continue his service, he was marked as a potential insubordinate, a label that would later return to haunt him. Tanner's chief instructional officer, Commander Myra Dunstock, warned him to take military life more seriously. She took Tanner to a refugee facility, an experience he would later characterize as showing him what the military is there to prevent. Tanner recognized a last chance when he saw it, discarded his role as camp comedian, and threw himself into his training with unprecedented energy. The decisive incident in Tanner's career was the Autolycus Mutiny of 3271. At the time, Tanner was serving as chief gunnery officer on board the FDN Autolycus, a Farragut-class battlecruiser, under the command of Captain Jaden Horn. The ship was dispatched to restore order at Cold Harbor Station, which had been occupied by rebels following a descent into civil disorder. Captain Horn's orders were to monitor the station and await reinforcements, but when contact with the station was abruptly lost, he became convinced an attack was imminent. Surveillance footage later showed Horn acting in an increasingly erratic fashion. He screamed orders, slurred his words, and struck an ensign for making a minor mistake. Seeing a group of civilian ships preparing to leave the station, Horn ordered Tanner to open fire, convinced they were about to ram the Autolycus. Tanner refused to obey the order, claiming it was unlawful and that Horn was unfit to command. In the time it took for a furious Horn to have Tanner thrown in the brig, the escaping ships had jumped out of the system. At Tanner's court-martial, Horn tried to use his history of rebelliousness against him, but an explosive series of revelations followed. The escaping ships had been carrying evacuees, and the station's apparent silence was in fact due to Horn himself, who had disabled shipborne communications without telling his crew. Horn, who it would later emerge had been suffering from xalamine-induced psychosis, committed suicide at the trial by hijacking a fighter and detonating.
Lakon, Whiskey Alpha Bravo. It's good to see you, Commander. Please enjoy your stay at this facility.
Tanner was exonerated, receiving a commendation from President Antonia Madison for his
Access authorized. Please head directly for Bay 39er.
actions. Individuals. Aisling Duval.
My grandfather had an heirloom he used to keep in our winter palace. It was a priceless marble statuette of one of our ancestors standing with his foot on a woman's neck, while she looks up at him in fear or adoration, probably both. I loathed it. It was commissioned to commemorate some victory or other, but that wasn't the point of the thing. The message was clear, and it's the same one I've heard all my life. Deep down, the people we dominate are happy to be dominated. When I was 6 years old, I smashed it. The servants came running. My father stormed down the stairs in his gown. He asked if it was an accident. There was such a strange look in his eyes. I knew that if I said yes, nobody would argue. Nothing more would be said. But I didn't. I stamped my foot and said, "No, Daddy, I did it on purpose." It's the same with tradition. The people who pass it on think it's precious. They expect you to cherish it and pass pass it on in turn. But what they think doesn't matter, because the responsibility rests with you. If you know it's wrong, then you have to smash it. On purpose.
Aisling Duval. A fireside chat with Serena, 33. Princess Aisling Duval, born in 3276.
Docking complete. Crime crew dispatched. Greetings, Commander.
Is a prominent member of the Imperial royal family. The eldest child of the infamous Prince Harold, she had a troubled upbringing. Her father was notorious for his hedonistic lifestyle, while her mother, entertainer Imogen Eccentrica Gabriellini, died from an aneurysm shortly after Aisling's birth. The autopsy identified the cause of death as an overdose of purple sunflake, an obscure and expensive narcotic. But conspiracy theorists insisted that she was murdered to remove an embarrassment to the royal family. Aisling has indicated that she is aware of these rumors, but has never commented on them. Despite living a life of great privilege, Aisling has publicly embraced the cause of the less fortunate and become an outspoken opponent of slavery, something that has made her the target of fierce criticism from more traditionalist Imperials. But despite this criticism, Aisling is a popular figure with a widespread media presence. Her campaigning has brought definite benefits to many of the poorest in Imperial society, and gone some way towards easing tensions between the Empire and the Federation. Her critics, however, dismiss her as a puppet, doing the bidding of a shadowy circle of rises. They claim there is no underlying coherence to Aisling's policies. To them,
Ship uncoupled. Maintain correct lane on exit.
she is a naive and sentimental child, without the necessary experience for politics, backing one populist cause after another, always conscious of how her activism is affecting her. Significantly, the most savage of Aisling's critics and the staunchest of her defenders agree on a counterpoint to this, that her apparent vacuity is nothing but a front, carefully created in collusion with the very advisors whom others believe are expecting her. The people's princess, they argue, is exceptionally good at being underestimated. Following the death of Hengist Duval in 3301, Aisling was considered by many to be a viable contender for the Imperial throne. As Aisling was born out of wedlock, however, and her father was removed from the line of succession on the grounds of mental incapacity, Arissa Lavinie Duval was deemed to have the stronger claim. Individuals.
I may not be religious, but I still have faith. Not the kind my parents have. In fact, I don't think their desperate devotion can even be called faith. The point of faith is that it's tested. And if you insist that your beliefs are above criticism or analysis like the star cults do, you're refusing to allow your faith to be tested at all. What do I have faith in? The fundamental sanity of the universe, I suppose. I don't believe in absolute evil, only in the iniquity that emerges when understanding fails. I believe intelligent life will naturally tend towards cooperation rather than conflict, not because there's a higher power guiding our decisions, but because that's simply the most logical course. And yes, our recent experiences with the Thargoids have tested that faith harshly.
Albert Tesreau. Professor Albert Tesreau is an Imperial scientist, an affiliate of the Achenar Research Council, and a founding member of the Joint Superpower Initiative Aegis, which was established in August 3303 to investigate the Thargoid menace. She currently serves as Aegis's head of research. Tesreau's biological parents were members of the Besmeratu cult, an isolationist group secreted within a sealed compound that believed itself to have been chosen for salvation by non-human beings. The cult's charismatic leader, Anton Hotep, claimed humanity had been under the protection of these beings for millennia. as their cosmic messiah, and that only the believers would be saved from the coming apocalypse. It's
Lakon, Whiskey Alpha Bravo. Station services are on standby for your arrival, Commander. Good to have you.
to these claims, you've produced alien artifacts, allegedly sourced from archaeological digs that other cult members were never permitted to examine closely. Alba was marked as a troublemaker from an early age due to her heretical belief in rationality and the scientific method. She was formally banished from Besmeraldo after she sabotaged the air purifying system, forcing them.
Approved for access. Your assigned landing pad is number 40.
To call for help from outsiders, and thus humiliating Hotep. After her story became public knowledge, she was adopted into the household of Senator Olivia Tesreau of Achenar and awarded a scholarship to study at Grand Imperial, alongside the children of the nobility. She wrote her master.
We've got some moderate traffic around the facility, Commander. Regulate your speed.
Thesis on the potential uses of mathematics as a lingua franca between human beings and intelligent non-humans. She is passionately interested in non-human intelligence and meaningful discourse between species, despite the counterfeit alien contact myths of her early life, or perhaps because of them. She is determined to do whatever she can to act as a bridge between human and non-human cultures. Individuals. Archon Delane.
I'll tell you, Delane is the most trustworthy cuss you could ever work with.
Why?
He makes good on his threats. Anyone else tells you that they're gonna cut off your index fingers and hammer them into your sinuses with your own severed foot, you know it's just bluster. But if Delane tells you that, you know he'll do exactly what he says. He wants people to be afraid of him, and that means he keeps his promises.
Landing operation complete. Securing ship. Good to have you, Commander.
You gotta respect that.
Mantle Hoek, arms trader. Archon Delane is the head of the Cumo crew, a powerful criminal syndicate. He refers to himself as the Pirate King, a title not recognized by any government. Delane's early life is not documented, and there are competing legends of his origin. Some believe he grew up in a drug den on one of the frontier worlds where he learned to fight. Other stories have him working as a bouncer in the brothel where he was born, or training as a grease monkey at an orbital shipyard that hosted clandestine arena fights after hours. What is certain is that Delane challenged and slaughtered the reigning pirate lord of the Cumo when he was only 15. The title of Pirate Lord is only transferred on the death of the incumbent, either to a nominated successor or to the victim of a ritual challenge. According to tradition, Pirate Lord must honor
Clear the landing pad. You are go for departure.
challenge to his leadership, regardless of who issues it, although the choice of weapons is left to him. In Delane's case, Pirate Lord Crab opted for a bare hands contest, a highly unusual choice. It has been suggested that Crab saw Delane as a weak target due to his albinism, unworthy of the Pirate Lord's personal attention. It is possible that Crab intended to give Delane a beating rather than kill him outright. If so, it was a fatal act of mercy. Footage of the fight shot by onlookers shows Delane deftly evading Crab's heavy blows, allowing the larger man to tire himself out before delivering a sudden jab to Crab's eye. Delane then battered Crab into submission, continuing to pummel the body until it was unrecognizable. The Cumo crew immediately split, dividing itself into those who saw Delane as a legitimate leader and those who refused to follow an unproven youth. The rift was soon closed, however, as Delane proved himself as capable a leader as he was a fighter. It became clear that Delane intended to establish not only his own reputation, but that of the crew. From then on, Delane crushed any dissent with the same uncompromising brutality he had shown. He took a zero-tolerance approach to the petty squabbles that had previously paralyzed the Cumo crew, and in doing so, turned what had been an anarchic band of opportunists United in purpose and more organized than ever before, the Cumo crew quickly became the terror of the Pegasus sector, absorbing lesser pirate gangs, raiding civilian stations with impunity, and taking over corporate facilities. In Delane's early years of leadership, many rival pirate lords demanded the right to one-on-one combat, each of them convinced that they would be the one to strike him down and take over his enviable criminal empire. Delane met each challenger in turn, agreed to their choice of weapons, and promptly dispatched them. After the death of Pirate Lord Horvath, who Delane strangled with his own razor whip, there were no further challenges. Delane and his Cumo crew rule by fear, but they operate according to strict rules. If a settlement in Cumo territory has paid its tribute, any Cumo pirate foolish enough to raid it risks being stripped of his rank, his crew, his possessions, his skin, and his life, according to the severity of the offense. These are the infamous 5 strippings, instigated by Delane as a standard punishment across Cumo territory. Individuals. Arissa Lavinie Duval.
I am a daughter, not just of the Emperor, but of the Empire. And I look upon our traditions and achievements with pride. I hold, as my forefathers did, that to be born Imperial is to receive the blessings of the universe. That is the true meaning of the ceremonial wine tipped upon our newborn heads. Does this pride in our heritage make me old-fashioned? Some would say so. I know that there are those in my family who cannot bear the burden of rank and privilege without a chronic sting of guilt. But I ask that you look charitably upon those so ailing, as I do. After all, rebellion is the prerogative of adolescence. I ask that you reserve your anger for a worthier target. For those who acknowledge our traditions in public, but privately serve only their own corrupt interests. For those who exploit their ancestors' sacrifices while holding our military in contempt. For all the petty, venom, spineless parasites in our very midst. I have sat with many such parasites, and for form's sake, I have masked my contempt. But that mask has served its purpose, and now I cast it aside. To the worms nestling so complacently in the heart of my beloved empire, I say this: we see you, and we are coming.
Arissa Lavinie.
Icon, Whiskey Alpha Bravo. Boston Station Commander. Please fly safely.
Duval. Private speech given at her post-coronation.
Access authorized. Clear command at Docking Bay 02.
Arissa Lavinie Duval is the reigning emperor, having been appointed to the position by the Imperial Senate, and a direct descendant of the first emperor, Henson Duval. Her father was originally thought to be the late Prince Aristide de Lavinie, but Arissa's claim to be the illegitimate daughter of Emperor Hengist Duval has since been ratified by DNA testing. Arissa distinguished herself as a serving senator early in life. Unlike other senators who took their patron support for granted or left the work of intercession to a delegated representative, Arissa made a point of visiting and speaking directly with her patrons. Foremost among her concerns was how little scope for mobility the Empire offered. In theory, it was possible to rise in rank, but in reality, power was hoarded and loyal service went unrewarded. To her mother's horror, Arissa proceeded to go undercover as a slave in the Lagany household on Achenar, talking to the staff and listening in on meetings. What she learned would change her view of the Empire forever. The rules could be broken with impunity, so long as the proper bribes were paid. A senator's favor could be secured, a corporation Federation's accounts could be doctored, and an atrocity could be covered up for the right price. On paper, it might be a patronage system, but it operated as a de facto plutocracy. Arissa's experience as a slave also cemented her own view of imperial slavery, namely that it was no worse than indentured servitude, and downright luxurious compared to what the Federation's lowest paid workers had.
Docking successful. Engaging docking restraints. Greetings, Commander.
Non-imperial commentators responded by pointing out that slaves in noble households on Akana could hardly be held up as typical examples of slavery, and that Arissa might have learned more had she spent her time in a Mastopolos mining facility. Arissa has made no secret of her determination to restore the rule of law within the Empire. She means to purge it of corruption, and has received widespread public support for this cause. Unlike her niece, Aisling Duval, she sees the Empire's system as inherently worthy, if impeded by term neglect. They need to be cleansed, not torn down and rebuilt, as per Aisling's wishes. As the first woman to serve as Emperor, Arissa is a controversial figure to many, regardless of her personal political stance. Many
Disengage from landing pad. Moderate speed on exit.
traditionalists within the Empire have vowed to depose her and replace her with a ruler more to their liking. Individuals. Denton Patrios.
What disgusts me? That's unsaid. By asking it, you reveal that you consider me a man of taste. If you'd asked me what I hated, I'm not sure I could have hidden my disappointment in such a banal question. But disgust, that deserves an answer. It's jealousy that most disgusts me. It's such a petty, self-defeating emotion. I see it every day. Most men look at me and think, I want what he has. Perhaps 1 in 1,000 thinks, how can I achieve what he achieved? Now, he's not jealous. He's motivated. Who knows? We might work together one day. But most men are not like that. They have the desire, but not the initiative. It's like a dog watching you eat and wishing he was a human. And that's the tragic thing about jealous people. They think they hate me, but really they hate themselves. Because deep in their hearts they know they're too lazy to fight for their dreams.
Denton Patrius, a fireside chat with Serena, 3302. Denton Patrius is a powerful Imperial senator and the Admiral of the Imperial Fleet. He is a controversial figure, admired by many Imperials for his wealth and influence, but deeply unpopular in other quarters for his uncompromising approach to debtors. He is also noted for commanding one of the strongest private military fleets in colonized space. Patrius has repeatedly issued loans to struggling governments via shell companies, only to later hike up the interest rates. When the government defaults on the loan, a common occurrence, Patrius moves in to foreclose. Since few governments are able to match the power of his private fleet, this is usually a one-sided affair, although some governments have appealed for and received the aid of independent pilots. This strategy has brought numerous systems under the control of Patrius's various corporations. If Patrius has any long-term goals beyond increasing his personal power and holding the line against the Alliance and the Federation, they are not publicly known. Politically, he has always played the part of the loyal Imperial. He accepts the need for progress, and has devoted considerable attention to eradicating Emperor's Dawn, an insurgent organization responsible for the assassination of Emperor Hengist Duval. His support for the Empire has been well rewarded, and as Admiral of the Fleet, he enjoys an enviable level of prestige. But even this may not be enough, and many have speculated that Patrius harbors a desire to become Emperor. During the period of uncertainty that followed the death of Hengist Deval, Patria suggested that the title of emperor be a supplement. Raises some public support rather than lineal consent. The statement was widely interpreted.
Lakon, Whiskey Alpha Bravo. The Federation welcomes you, Commander. We'd be happy to serve you in this port.
When the succession passed to Orissa Lavinia on a vote in the Senate, Patrias did not contest it. The question,
Access granted. Make your way to landing pad number 32.
who should succeed Orissa Lavinia is now a pertinent one. Imperial commentators have suggested that Patrias's highly visible courtship of Princess Aisling Deval may be part of a long-term strategy, as well as a piece of subtle media manipulation. Orissa Lavinia Deval has no children, whereas a child born to a Patrias-Deval partnership could be an extremely strong contender for the throne. Individuals: Edmund Mahon.
Naturally, we faced criticism over the Lu conflict. Many people thought we should have been in there, guns blazing. On the one hand, you have a system that wants to be independent, and on the other, you have the oppressive Federation telling them no. The authorities in Lu put out a call for aid, and what did the Alliance do? We turned them down. That would never have happened on the Holos, would it? I would have been at the head of the Alliance fleet, taking down the Fed-Cap ship with a well-aimed torpedo up the tailpipe. But life isn't like
400 meters from touchdown.
the Holos. You need political and legal clarity. When Lu asked for our help, who exactly was doing the asking? The people? All right then. Which people? Who counted their votes, and how was the process monitored? Was their decision an informed?
Touchdown sequence complete. Dispatching ground. Station facilities are at your disposal, Commander.
One, or were they bombarded with propaganda? The Alliance is rigorous, you see. You can't join a voluntary association of free systems unless you can offer demonstrable proof of your freedom to choose, just as you can't enter into a contract without being of sound mind, acting without coercion.
Edmund Mahon, responding to a question from Jessica Braganza, one of Orossa's schoolchildren visiting
Detach is good. You may leave when ready.
Prime Minister's residence. Edmund Mahon is the current Prime Minister of the Alliance. The product of a corn-farming family based on Birmingham in the DSO system, Mahon was hard-working and shrewd from an early age, with a particular talent for negotiation. He only seemed able to beat his crop prices down, and he always managed to shave something off the asking price of any tools or machinery the family needed. In the first book of his autobiography, The Shadow of Silo 7, he attributes this talent to preparatory research, claiming that he always found out as much as he could about the people he would be dealing with before meeting them. At 18, Mahon won a federal scholarship to study law. Frustrated with what he saw as the imbalance of power between corporations and their employees, Mahon intended to specialize in cases of corporate exploitation. He quickly found, however, that the legal profession was not to his liking. Awash with duplicity, double talk, and corruption was his assessment, and he switched track to political science. 2 years into his course, and following an increasingly vocal series of broadcasts on a personal video channel in which he argued in favor of the newly formed alliance, Mahon's scholarship funds were abruptly cut off. He had unknowingly violated a clause that required him to refrain from public criticism of the federal government. Unwilling to return to his family without having made something of himself, Mahon had no choice but to look for work while continuing to study. The bar in which he had spent so many hours as a student was happy to take him on as a bartender, and he proved so competent that after his graduation, he took on the role of manager. Mahon claims it was this experience, rather than any innate idealism, that set him on the path to becoming a career politician. As he puts it, a good bartender has to be able to listen and to give equal respect to everyone, while demanding that others do the same. He has to be able to distinguish what is meant from what is said, encourage free exchange of views while tactfully enforcing the rules, and, when necessary, break up fights. Mahon's break into politics came when his friends encouraged him to run for city office against the favoured corporate candidate, Jensen Crane. The Mahon campaign began as a token protest, since Crane was expected to win by a comfortable majority. Mahon eviscerated Crane in the live debates, however, winning over the audience with a combination of wry humour and an empathetic awareness of local concerns that Crane could not hope to match, living as he did in a high-altitude apartment complex. Crane was elected by a narrow margin, but Mahon's supporters begged him to continue in politics. So it was that, at the age of just 27, Mahon found himself working alongside elder statesperson Irene Mendel, helping with a campaign to break the DSO system away from the Federation and make it a part of the Alliance. By the time DSO joined the Alliance in 3286, Mahon was a seasoned parliamentarian. He served as a planetary representative several times before making his bid for the premiership. Individuals. Felicia Winters.
Politics has always been a breeding ground for lies. But one lie outshines all the others. And today, we heard it once again. It is the insinuation that to seek a diplomatic solution is weak. That a preference for discussion over conflict means we're afraid to fight. We are accustomed to this, of course. We've heard the president's supporters pervert our words again and again. When we face up to the Federation's previous wrongs, they mock us for our so-called liberal guilt. When we celebrate a détente between the superpowers that will help us oppose the Thargoid menace, they imply that we are traitors. But it is they who are afraid, and with good reason. Because the people of the Federation have had enough. They will no longer be manipulated into reckless conflicts that serve only to fatten the wallets of the arms dealers and the privileged. They will no longer pretend that Hudson's tub thumping and saber rattling is anything more than vacuous propaganda. From star to star, Connolly to Complex.
Layton, Whiskey Alpha Bravo. It's good to see you, Commander. Please enjoy your stay at this facility.
Satellite to station. We hear the same.
Permission authorized. Please enter into
Heartfelt cry. Let the mistakes of the past remain in the past. And let the Federation embrace only the best of itself. Let us return to the core values of hard work, honest trade, support for the vulnerable, and mutual respect. The people are ready for us. Let us be ready for them.
Felicia Winters, Liberal Party Annual Address, 3303. Felicia Winters is the head of the Liberal Party of the Federation, and as such serves as ex officio shadow president, opposite President Zachary Hudson of the Republican Party. Winters was born and raised on Taylor Colony, one of the oldest human colonies, and worked for the Sirius Corporation before going into politics full-time at the age of 44. Her current role was thrust upon her unexpectedly. Prior to 3301, Winters was Secretary of State to then-President Jasmine Halsey. When both Halsey and Vice President Ethan Naylor went missing aboard Starship One, Winters became acting president. The assumption of this responsibility left her visibly shaken, and despite her popularity in Congress, it was widely felt she was not up to the job. The Liberal Party was in a state of crisis at the time following the Lu conflict. A group of forces had sought to make the Lu system independent from federal control, prompting a declaration of war from the Federation. Many of the party's supporters were shocked by President Halsey's decision to open fire.
Docking complete. Ground crew dispatched. Good to have you with us, Commander.
G-ships during the conflict questioned the action, arguing passionately with her friend Halsey behind closed doors, while maintaining a front of public solidarity. Consequently, she found herself responsible for a party whose voter base had largely deserted it, and whose values had slipped out of alignment with her own. Shortly after Halsey's disappearance, Zachary Hudson called for an emergency vote of no confidence that he resoundingly won, resulting in his appointment to the role of president. Given the massive support for and the disarray among the Liberals, Winters was expected to resign and let the Liberal Party rebuild itself in the Crown. Instead, she threw herself, leading efforts to persuade various systems not to defect to the alliance.
Detachment complete. Exit station quickly and safely.
Planets inbound. Her energetic and proactive approach led to fresh support for both her and her party, and she currently runs in the United States. Individuals. Hengist Duval. Hengist Duval, 3163 to 3301, was the 15th ruler of the Empire. He was assassinated on the day of his wedding to Florence Lavinia. Hengist reigned during a time of significant change. The Imperial Senate had begun to grow in power, a process that had begun during the long sickness of Hengist's father, Hesper. The development of the frameshift drive had radically altered life in human-occupied space, facilitating easy access to goods and interstellar travel, and opening formerly isolated cultures to outside influence. Old animosities between the Empire and the Federation finally began to fade. Hengist appeared to neither resist nor oppose these many changes. Instead, wanted to keep the Empire stabilized on a day-to-day basis. This middle ground approach was deeply unpopular with the Empire's hardcore traditionalist elements, who saw Hengist as short-sighted, detached, and complacent. In 3238, Hengist wed Anthea Viola Lamberton in an arranged marriage, planned since his childhood by his late father. Despite a storm of publicity and celebrations across Imperial space that verged on the hysterical, there was clearly little genuine affection between the couple. It was an open secret that the match had been made solely because of optimal genetic compatibility, and that Hengist could not refuse without dishonoring his father's memory. As the marriage crumbled, Hengist spent much of his time with his boyhood friend, Aristide de Lavigny, and his wife, Florence, in their estate on Achenar. Inflammatory tracts from this period portray the imperial dynasty and its noble cohorts as little more than libertines, indulging in lascivious affairs and lengthy holidays, while the Senate did the real work of government. The most scurrilous rumor was that the Duval genetic code had been corrupted by centuries of interference, prompting speculation that a successor of the true blood would have to be found. The birth of Hengist's heir, Prince Harold, temporarily quieted the skeptics. A carefully orchestrated father-son photo shoot when Harold was 9 showed the pair riding horses on Achenar, throwing javelins, watching a senatorial debate, and preparing for a seasonal feast. The photo shoot was clearly designed to traditional imperial values, and it succeeded. For several years after, Prince Harold was the
Lakon, Whiskey Alpha Bravo. Federation Bravo Command would be happy to serve you with this port.
a symbol of promise and hope. The intense media focus on the prince's life is now believed to be partly responsible for his fruitful grace, which saw him become a notorious playboy and philanderer, and which eventually resulted in his exclusion from the succession on the grounds of mental incapacity. Towards the end of Hengist's life, it emerged that Arissa Lavigne, the daughter of Florence Lavigne, was in fact his daughter. Hengist intended to strengthen her claim to the throne by marrying Florence, thus legitimizing Arissa, but he was assassinated before this could take place. The most enduring criticism of Emperor Hengist is that he failed to plan adequately for the future. Certainly, the matter of the succession created tensions that endure to this day. Individuals. Ishmael Palin.
If the history of eugenics tells us anything...
Warning. Access to this station is by authorization only, Commander. Exit this facility immediately. Landing permission
It is
cannot
that
be
we do
granted.
not tend towards greater egalitarianism over time, but rather find new ways for the privileged
Request denied.
to exploit and...
Okay, Commander. Your assigned landing pad is number 225.
control dispossessed. Nevertheless, I do occasionally dream of ways in which we might evolve further. If I could change just one aspect of human nature, it would be our chronic tendency towards tribalism. In that matter, we have barely advanced a step in 1,000,000 years. While the sun shines, we meet and treat with one another, but when the skies darken, we withdraw and whisper suspiciously. And at the first flash of the unknown, we huddle like witless primates in a cave, terrified of the thunder, trusting to
2,000 meters from touchdown.
smell the same as us.
Professor Ishmael Palin, Memorandum to Students, 3289. Professor Ishmael Palin is a scientist specializing in research into non-human technologies and cultures, with a particular emphasis on material artifacts. He is generally considered one of the galaxy's foremost experts on the Thargoids. Professor Palin began his career working for the federal government as a member of the Homeland Scientific Council. In 3301, when objects apparently of non-human origin were discovered in a number of systems, the Federation launched a research program and placed Professor Palin in charge.
Docking confirmed. Dispatching ground crew. Welcome to the station, Commander.
Of many, the program was shut down after only a week. Ostensibly on the grounds of safety, Palin refused to comment on the decision, but inside sources later revealed stark differences of opinion between Palin and the federal authorities. Palin insisted that the fruits of his team's research into the so-called unknown artifacts, later reclassified as Thargoid sensors, should be open to everyone, but his federal paymasters wanted the Federation alone to benefit. Palin promptly established his own research program, the Palin Institute, and announced his intent to relocate to the Maya system, beyond the boundaries of Supercon's-controlled space. His ship disappeared shortly after he set off for Maya, however, and it was not until March 3302 that Palin and his crew were discovered, alive, in escape pods in the Oros system. Palin revealed that unknown parties had abducted the team, held them captive, and questioned them extensively about the research. Shortly thereafter, Palin stepped down as the head of the Palin Institute.
Docking clamps retracted. You are go for departure.
In favor of Cora Shaw, citing opposition to his work for dark forces as this is. He established his own independent research center on Maya 83A and began to study meta-alloys, a material sourced from the Thargoid structures nicknamed barnacles. In October 3302, Palin discovered that meta-alloys could be related to advanced technologies, but no sooner had the news broken than the Federation blockaded his research center with a Farragut-class battlecruiser, preventing all access. The move was condemned by the Alliance and the Empire, but the Federation appeared to take no notice. Almost a year later, in September 3303, the federal blockade was lifted. No explanation was given, either for the blockade or for its cessation. The event has since been interpreted as the beginning of the end of the Federal Imperial Cold War. Professor Palin's career has been an inspiration to many young scientists. Partly because of his determination in research and benefit everyone, and partly because of his dogged tenacity in the face of repeated interference. He was aware that by choosing to study since there were shadowy agencies who very much wanted to be the sole beneficiaries of this research. But he defiantly persisted with his work nonetheless. Professor Palin may not consider himself heroic, but the fact remains that many less principled scientists in his position would have long ago submitted to intimidation or the promise of a tomb. Individuals. Jasmina Halsey.
I know what they're saying. They're picking my story to pieces. Some of the criticism is rational. The lack of corroborative evidence, for example. I don't mind that. I'm telling the truth, after all. An irrational approach can't hurt the truth. But when they say what I experienced is an archetypal conversion story, and that makes it suspect, what I saw reminds people of historical accounts. Doesn't that say something about those experiences?
Jasmina Halsey, 3302. Jasmina Halsey, a former politician, served as president of the Federation from 3300 to 3301. She now works as a peace activist and close advisor to Alliance Prime Minister Edmund Mahon. Halsey claims the profound transformation of her views is the result of a visionary experience in which she communicated with benign non-human life forms, an episode that allegedly occurred in 3301, following the destruction of her vessel, Starship One. Prior to the disappearance of Starship One, Halsey's presidency was unpopular among federal citizens. Taxes had been raised too many times, and her military interventions were seen as heavy-handed. The campaign to ban the narcotic Onionhead went awry when the crops were firebombed, resulting in collateral damage. During the Lu Rebellion, Halsey gave the order to fire on a civilian convoy, in the belief that a rebel leader was on one of the vessels. Many senior commanders in the Federal Navy lost faith in Halsey and transferred their loyalty to then-Shadow President Zachary Hudson. Hudson called for a vote of no confidence in Halsey's government shortly after Starship One went missing and achieved an overwhelming victory. Though Halsey was later found alive, drifting in an escape pod, suggestions that she might be reinstated as president gained little support. Perhaps surprisingly, Halsey's account of her experiences has received a large degree of acceptance among the galactic community. But even those who accept her description of an encounter with non-human entities suspect there is more to the story than has been made public. Skeptics hold that the event presents too many unanswered questions, such as precisely what happened to Starship One, as well as offering Halsey a suspiciously convenient way out of her failing presidential career. The most scathing of Halsey's critics condemn her as a traitor and defector who was conspiring with Edmund Mahon even before she left the Federation, and who staged the Starship One catastrophe as a convoluted means of defecting to the Alliance, taking vital federal intelligence with her. Halsey originally addressed these theories by emphasizing how incompatible they were with her, citing her efforts to establish refugee centers.
Recon Whiskey Alpha Bravo. Thank you for choosing our station, Commander. We hope you find everything to your liking.
To the public condemnation of the Federal and Imperial Court. More recently, she simply loved them.
Permission authorized. Please head directly for Bay 09.
Individuals. Lee Yong-Rui.
The fortune teller rattling bones in her simple hut, the smiling insurance salesman with his snakeskin briefcase, and the data analyst with his interactive holographic model are all selling the same thing: certainty. One of the paradoxes of human existence is that we crave the freedom to be spontaneous, thinking it essential to our nature, while constantly seeking reassurance that nothing unexpected is going to happen. We flatter ourselves with the belief that we are exempt.
Your approach is good. Maintain current course.
The rules of modeling that govern the rest of the universe.
Introduction to Becoming the Watchmaker. Lee Yong-Rui's master's thesis on the innate human reluctance to accept behavioral predictability. Lee Yong-Rui is the chief operating officer of the Sirius Corporation and its governmental subsidiary.
400 meters from touchdown.
Sirius Gov. Like many other members of Yong Rui came to the corporate world from an academic background, having achieved doctorates in multiple fields and specializing in extrapolating potential future situations from limited data. Although he is in many respects an innovator, Yong Rui
Confirmed contact. Commence power down. Station services are at your disposal.
is the archetype of a healthy, energetic corporate executive, with little of the eccentricity that traditionally characterizes visionaries. A good deal of his popularity is attributable to his innate serenity and outward conventionality. Those who have worked